Shall I turn off these lights? Or can we see everything that life has to offer? Um, I don't know how good this is going to be simply because of the way everything's kind of fuzzy on a live stream. But because this is a long video, I don't know if this is this is the Gene Roddenberry archive. The same people who had worked on Star Trek stuff, recreating the bridges, recreating the ships, the props, throughout the almost 60 years of archives of Star Trek stuff. So I'm going to be looking at this video, 2001, creating Kubrick's Space Odyssey. I might even zoom out a little bit because maybe the smaller it is, the sharper it is, or whatever. I don't know. It's going to be difficult. I'm going to try to do the Nintendo Direct. It's a partner showcase, Indie World, tomorrow or today, but in a few hours. So I don't know what's going to happen here. Let's find out. Let's find out. Let's see what it's all about. So
2001: A Space Odyssey was born of the genius of two giants, legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick.
Are they going to recreate? I've seen some people try to recreate the stuff.
Together, they set out to make what they called the proverbial good science fiction movie, along with an amazing team of artists, technicians, and actors. They created.
That's a great movie. I have that downloaded.
In the process, they changed cinema forever.
Wow. Way to lay the obvious words out. But yes, that's true. This was before Star Wars.
The most powerful idea in 2001 is that you have no way of pinning it down. There is no literal...
I'm going to watch the first 10 minutes, and if I don't see anything obvious here, like a recreate, if they're not recreating this, I'm going to move on. I might see that 3-minute thing that was the latest video.
If you think about science fiction cinema, if you think about the history of science fiction cinema, you can really measure it in terms of before Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey and after 2001: A Space Odyssey, going all the way back to the very
2010 was also was the sequel.
A handful of really groundbreaking visionary movies. Think of
2010 was like the Alien movie without the alien and the horror.
Very far reaching, and they were innovative for their day. But after that point, it turned into a B genre. Prior to
Also like Buck Rogers from the World's Fair from 1935, 1934.
Forbidden Planet, Day the Earth Stood Still. The tone of those films was more serious and took the subject matter at its value. In the 1950s, Destination Moon was one of the few real attempts at a hard science fiction movie until 2001. It's interesting, I got to know Christiane Kubrick, Stanley's widow. She and Stanley would read science fiction
before Star Trek and Star Wars.
As she said to me, science fiction was just one step removed from pornography on the social acceptance scale. At the time. That cultural landscape was one that Kubrick sensed an opportunity with.
These are old books. This is what inspired Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster to do Superman.
Did anything the way that was cheapest or easiest. Kubrick's movies are some of the only ones I've ever heard about that didn't seem subject to normal Hollywood rules. He didn't even make that many movies, and every single one is a masterpiece.
We're talking about a great artist here, somebody who always wanted to best himself.
Anytime a new Stanley Kubrick film came out, it was an event. He took his time and spent years in preparation, and each film was so distinctly different.
Roger Karras, who Stanley had met at Columbia Pictures when he was shooting Spartacus and later worked for Stanley. He was having lunch with Stanley at Trader Vic's. Stanley was living up on the west side at this time.
Trader Vic's.
Roger Karras was then head of publicity.
Trader Joe's.
And Roger asked Stanley what he was up to, and he said, well, he wanted to make a picture about aliens.
At that time, Kubrick would say, well, I'm not sure you're going to find this worthy, but science fiction, you know.
And so Roger's, why don't you talk to Arthur Clarke? He's the best. And he said, well, he's crazy, lives in a tree, and so on. No, he's not crazy.
He's not crazy?
And Clarke, of course, was because he always wanted to break into film.
Arthur came to New York, holed up in room 803 in the Chelsea Hotel, and he and Stanley worked every day for months. The greatest genius in film and the greatest genius in science fiction
his idea that the jump into space was as important on an evolutionary scale as the movement from the sea to the land of life.
We're far too close to the beginning of the space program to see it in its real perspective. The analogy, which has now become a cliche, that it's like life's emergence from the sea.
Let's see how much more we got here.
It is perfectly true.
I'm going to skip ahead after the first 10 minutes.
Fish couldn't have begun to conceive what was going to happen on the land in the next few 100 million years. So we can't possibly imagine what's going to take place in space.
So he believed that the space age heralded the beginning of a next stage of evolution. And 2001: A Space Odyssey is all about 3 stages of evolution: pre-human, human, and post-human.
Arthur had great vision. He was also
Okay. What's after the humans?
You could talk about anything with them. Both Renaissance men.
Clark and Kubrick walked all over Manhattan brainstorming about what to film for months and months and months. There were a number of stories that were optioned by Kubrick's production company, Polaris.
That's when minds were working. Now you just got people doing whatever corporate bullshit is socially acceptable.
The collections of the best science fiction of whatever year it was. I think it was 1950 or 1951, when a short story by Arthur C. Clarke was included, called The Sentinel. It was about a strange artifact discovered buried on the moon that was a cosmic alarm clock by a passing intelligence which could have been millions of years before.
And in the story, they take months and months to crack a crystal pyramid. It wasn't a monolith, it was a crystal
Oh,
pyramid.
that's
In
cool.
the story, Clark's narrator says this is probably something like
Some of the first like
alarm. And
sci-fi writers started out writing articles.
that we have made it to the moon. I wonder how quickly they're going to come.
Years later, when I was offered the part of Dave Bowman in 2001, something sounded awfully familiar about the section on the moon, and I realized I had read that short story years ago.
Kubrick, to his credit,
That's the guy.
understood that Arthur had not written a
Director.
screenplay, and so he proposed that they collaborate to write a science fiction novel, and that then they would make a script from the novel. You really have 2 authors of this story. Kubrick made the movie, and Clark did the book, and they were doing it in tandem. Stanley was consulting Arthur repeatedly throughout, and Arthur made significant contributions to simplify the story in the middle of production. You know, in my mind, Clark's novel is the left brain, experiencing this story, and Kubrick's the right side of my brain, this very emotional, almost unknowable version of events that define man's place in the universe. Kubrick methodically built on the concepts in the screenplay and in the emerging novel, and found nonverbal ways to tell the story. Kubrick just wouldn't accept the literalism that I guess...
Go 4 more minutes.
There was some tension with Arthur there as well, because Arthur was being asked to write voiceover narration to explain what was happening. So Arthur...
You have to explain everything.
...when he realized that his labored over voiceover texts were not going to be used. With all respect to Arthur, who I admire greatly, it saved the movie. Because rather than explaining, spoon-feeding the audience what was going on the screen, you have ambiguity. Whenever Stanley could choose ambiguity rather than explaining what was happening, he had the courage.
One of those recordings exists
I think
for the narration.
Very concerned about creating a story that was plausible, realistic in its approach, working with engineers and learning about how actual space exploration and space hardware worked and functioned, and what was not only occurring at the time but also projected into the future. He put together a think tank, not the typical film production design teams that would work in science fiction. It was aerospace engineers. Actually, 2001 was a giant research and development project. They wanted to get to truths. Kubrick and Clark were able to involve Frederick Ordway and Harry Lange, who were working with Wernher von Braun at the Marshall Space Flight Center. Ordway was basically the person who developed all the documents and the reports and speeches for von Braun, and Lange would then illustrate them. So you really had in those 2 men the A-team of design in terms of what the future of spaceflight might look like. And then they, in turn, got involved with Tony Masters, who was the production designer for the film, who'd worked on Lawrence of Arabia. And the 3 of them, consulting with Kubrick and Clark, were able to just design the whole world of 2001 from the ground up. Masters had a gift for understanding and building kinetic sets and kinetic structures. So much of what you see that's fascinating, believable in the film was his idea.
I still don't know how they did that. I guess it's like a giant hamster wheel.
From NASA. And so really what Kubrick got was people who were right on the cutting edge of technology. Every set, every tool had to look
authentic, which meant that everything they build had to be detailed and plausible, and it had to be thought out, and it had to be functional to a certain degree.
I think their focus was on practicality and realism. If you look at the lunar module, for example,
Wait a
it's
minute.
sort of unwieldy. It doesn't look like an aircraft, more of a collection.
Are we now
of
seeing the
shapes that are
recreations?
functional, that allow you to get where you need to go and do what you need to do. And I think they looked at a lot of that when they were creating the spacecraft.
I think we're looking at the recreations now.
Thrusters. They looked at the fact that
Oh, this is the archive stuff now.
It's very important to them to project where this kind of technology and material.
Yeah, you can't see it very well here.
Utterly committed to realism.
Oh, that's neat.
Back screen projection.
Recreated model.
Blue screen didn't work. Blue screen was not technically proficient enough back in the 1960s for his movie to look realistic. Kubrick had studied very carefully a film produced by the National Film Board of Canada in the early 60s called Universe, which succeeded in conveying galaxies and nebulae using tanks of black liquid in which oil paint was dropped and filmed at high frame rates under bright light. Something about that technique produced very believable nebulosity that was understandable as being interstellar. But that technique was studied very carefully by Kubrick, and he reproduced it, but now on 65 millimeter film in the Upper West Side in 1964 with very toxic solvents with paint poured on them, and it was all filmed at high frame rate. So the material that Kubrick shot was then used in a reel that they showed MGM.
So the archives are recreating all this. Look at this.
It was that early.
You can imagine Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke both at the 1964 World's Fair. They see a film called To the Moon and Beyond. They immediately were like, who are the people behind this? Gentlemen like Con Pedersen and Graphic Films in Los Angeles. They contacted them, and that's the beginning of the journey that led to the visual effects in 2001.
Kubrick realized when he went off to England to work on actual production that it was too far away, that he wanted the crew to be with him while he was shooting and in post-production. But Doug wanted to go work for Kubrick. He talked to Con Pedersen. He said, look, Doug, I can't tell you how to contact him, but I will say if you look on the bulletin board in the office, you might find something that you would find useful. And of course, there was Kubrick's number, and Doug just called him up.
Well, what Kubrick did have was some very smart people to work with. Douglas Trumbull, Con Pedersen, Wally Weavers, people that had wanted the opportunity to take something further, work with the director that said, we have no interference from the studio because...
Okay, let's see what else is here. There's more here. Okay, let me see this. Okay, so there's a little bit more. I'm just looking at the recreations of these things.
Because they're in the United States, we're in London. Let's take this as far as it can be taken. They basically committed to raising
I was like,
the bar.
yeah, there's the actors at the right.
What we did was going to be as good as we could possibly do. We were never held short of money or anything to do.
Those are the pictures, I think.
Turned out in the end.
One of the things that was a real challenge for them is the discovery. So you can
There
imagine
we go. That's the recreated model.
camera and keeping it all in focus and lighting it consistently. It moves so slowly.
It's like recreating just the models for right now, and then the sets.
Majesty and the enormity
That's
of the
neat.
spacecraft, right? The bottom line is you have this huge miniature that they had to sometimes expose multiple times.
Though they didn't
It's not
have
about the people on the set. It's just that model.
They did have stepper motors on some of the camera platforms so that they could do a movement within a certain amount of time. And
Oh,
repeat
that's-
that almost.
It was quite a challenge for the crew.
They went through multiple designs of it. Lange was involved, in all of them. And, at one point, because it was a nuclear-propelled spacecraft, it had radiators radiating out to dissipate heat, but it looked like it had wings, and people were saying, well, why would a deep space spacecraft need wings? That was too confusing. So they spent a lot of time doing it. They had all agreed on the design of it.
I was involved with the models and shooting all those with Stanley. We shot all the models against Black Velvet, and they were...
Okay, let's see. Let's see what we got. Wait a minute. Let me see. Is that recreation or picture?
Trucks, jeeps, there's missiles.
Picture. Okay, I'm looking for the models and shit. So I think we're going to skip ahead to anytime we see a model.
Piece of film, but it's a scary process.
This is a diagram.
Which is terrifying to me. It's risky because if you make a mistake, you've destroyed the entire take. But the payoff is a camera original, pristine image that cuts perfectly with regular production footage, an undetectable illusion.
A lot of the shots that are done in the film are actually created on the animation stand, not on the model filming stand. The elements are brought together and animated along the paths that they.
Yeah, those are 2D models, all 2D ships. Because you could obviously tell they're like little cardboard cutouts. So you see the space shuttle. But see, it was easier back then in those days to do it that way. Except for the space station, there had to be 3D.
A lot of those shots that way. You can sort of tell in the movie where that is done because there's not a lot of parallax or change of
Yeah,
angle.
yeah, it's easy.
Still amazing.
Easy to tell.
And
All right.
incredibly choreographed.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and. Oh wait, okay. There's some more modeling here.
Computers to just paint those wires out. They couldn't do that at that time period in 2001. So they would have to hang the actor from the ceiling and then put the camera directly underneath them so that the actor's body was actually hiding the wires.
It's a miraculous show zero G because they're sort of dangling.
Oh,
Shot them at a higher frame rate
that is
to
so neat.
smooth out their movements.
So what they're doing is the guy is hanging below the ship, but it's all on wires, but they have to film underneath.
Stuntman and how he was hanging over camera placement in
Okay.
a spacesuit on a cable.
Oh, here we go. More of
3
this.
stories above it, spinning above this camera crew that if he fell.
So yeah, the Roddenberry Archives recreating all of
He
this.
had a little tank where the bigger EVA oxygen tank unit was on his back. There was no rebreather possibility. There was no way of getting carbon dioxide out of his suit. But if the carbon dioxide is not being taken out, then you're going to gradually go unconscious. And he approached Stanley at one point and said, "Stanley, can we please cut some holes in the back of the helmet so that I can breathe?" And Kubrick would have none of it. Bleed in from home lights or something would bleed in.
No, your face turns blue like everyone else. Suffer through it.
Perfectionism. They saw that he was the first person there and the last person to leave. They saw him lose weight.
I bet. A lot of drama. Oh, okay, here we go. Hold on. Here we go. Okay.
Did that around?
That was something that was very, very different in 2001. That they actually dealt with the concept that there's no artificial gravity like you see in Star Trek or Star Wars. So the idea of using centrifugal force inside the spacecraft, like the Discovery or the giant.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was a giant fucking hamster wheel.
The crew to basically stick to the floor and kind of simulate gravity.
The centrifuge was basically a giant Ferris wheel with movable walls. It was built in England by.
I call it a hamster wheel, but
it rotated.
yeah,
It could be separated so
that's
that
that's
when the two
amazing.
halves were pushed together,
So you're just looking at a dummy running around, but that's how they shot this movie.
This little tiny space between the two halves where a rod with a camera could be inserted so that it could track us as it rotated. There were some shots where Gary and I had to step forward to turn on the camera and then step back and start the scene.
I think Kubrick took this one step further by not necessarily having the camera locked all the time.
That's the recreation here. This is a recreated set.
One of Kubrick's greatest bag of tricks.
Piano. I didn't even know there was a fucking piano in there.
Instance in 2001 is when the stewardess is on the Aries and she just sort of walks up the side of the wall and then walks into the cockpit.
That's all.
The orientation of the cockpit is somewhat different than the interior of the miniature.
She's basically walking in place, but the illusion is that she's walking, flipping upside down and changing her orientation. So another magical moment.
The pen floating in the Pan Am Space Clipper cabin was actually done very simply. The pen was just stuck to a big glass disc.
Oh, look at that.
It created the illusion that the pen was drifting in weightlessness without the need for wires or blue screen.
Oh yeah, it's all, these are all little tricks, but they recreated the little the space planes.
Into the airlock is truly amazing and quite dangerous, actually.
Oh shit!
Basically dropped from the pod towards the camera.
We couldn't use a stunt double because the whole point is that my character has forgotten his helmet in his hurry to rescue his colleague. The way we did it is this.
I haven't seen this actor in a long time. Then
on top of a platform,
that's the same.
camera, next to a circus roustabout who was wearing very thick gloves. The camera was on the floor 2 stories down. And on action, when they blasted the smoke, I jumped head first toward the camera. I had a wire under my costume that had a huge knot in it. And when that knot reached the gloved hands of the circus guy, he jumps off and hurtles, and I go hurtling back up like a blocking tackle.
Fuck!
We did it in one take. and Stanley's the only director that would have done that for, I promise you. One of my favorite
Wouldn't get away with it today unless you were an independent filmmaker. You would not get away, not by studio standards.
who played Moonwatcher,
You,
the
your
main ape
your
man.
your creativity has a time limit.
And cocks his head a couple of times, like he's thinking about something unusual. When his brain figures out the first tool, Dan did such an amazing job that I had people come up to me thinking these were real apes. Dan was filmed after I was wrapped. I remember being astounded by what Stanley had created.
Stanley had already
I'm sure
shot
they
all
asked
the live action of
Margot
Prometheus,
Robbie if
but
she was a
he
giant
hadn't
doll
opened
in the movie.
Kubrick had tried multiple ways of trying to.
Okay, let's see. I'm looking for all the CGI stuff because that's where he recreated everything. I think this is a recreation here.
Retro-reflective material for the screen. That's the same stuff that makes.
Yeah, but that's an easy thing for
bright at night, and you
the
get,
Roddenberry
of
archives
course,
to
when
create.
the camera and
So
the
here's a
actor
little
are
bit
next to
here.
each other, you still get a shadow of the actors and other foreground objects. Howard's solution was to build a special rig with a half-silvered mirror, so the camera and projector were exactly aligned, so the actors' bodies hid their own shadows.
Anybody working in virtual
Hmm.
production today on an LED volume would actually be very upfront with the fact that 2001 really set that sentence. And Kubrick was really ahead of the curve with that. He figured that out 40 years before anybody else.
People say, well, he took so many takes. Well, he took so many takes because we kept discovering things. Probably the best example of it is when I first pick up a bone and I'm going to eventually start breaking things and killing things. I don't even know how to hold it and whatnot, and I started playing with it, and one little rib bone that was in front of me went up in the air, and we were shooting MOS without sound, so I could talk to Stanley and he could talk to me. So I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Stanley," and he said, "No, I love it, do it again." And he played with the idea of a bone going, so that finally the shot at the end, which was the great cut, was the culmination of that little mistake that I did
Right.
by accident that Stanley discovered, and that together we perfected what became arguably one of the most
Best
important
things happen by
films
accident.
in history.
A lot of people might think that the great Stanley Kubrick was a gargantuan ego. I
Nah.
suppose you can't conceive to try to direct a film like that.
You just try to do it your way. George Lucas. What is this one? George Lucas had to fight tooth and nail just to get what he wanted.
But Christiane, his widow, and I had multiple conversations about his state of mind during the production, and there was a lot of self-doubt. Multiple points he would come back from a long day on the set and say to her things like, "I don't know how to end this. I don't know what I'm doing."
Kubrick and Clark were very collaborative all throughout the process in terms of crafting the story, scene ideas, how it might end.
They didn't have an ending, and they were still locked in an intensive discussion.
There was even talk for a while that they were actually going to try to visualize extraterrestrials in the film.
And Clark had been in communication with a very young Harvard professor named Carl Sagan. He was not yet famous. Sagan had written a couple.
Okay. I'm gonna. Here we go. This is. Here we go.
They could be somewhere on Earth, they could be on the moon. I mean, that's the dream of science fiction, that we will find something like that. The idea that
Recreations.
every culture, that either a god or an alien or somebody came down and said, this is how you plant crops, and we're going to twist your genes this way.
The aliens are echoes of strange.
Oh, here we go. Recreated.
That is enough to give us a feeling of strangeness, of we're being watched, of Bowman is being taken care of, to give us the idea that there is something more happening here.
My favorite set was that strange room at the end. It apparently was modeled after a real hotel in Paris, and the thinking is that the aliens somehow could read my thought memories and recreate for me this human habitat to make me feel more at home. What was so amazing about that set was the floor. It was entirely lit from underneath, so that in a way it was alien. I love how Stanley played with time and space in that sequence where I see myself older, and my older self hears something and goes to look and doesn't see anything.
We should just put him back in there. We could put him in there right now as he looks.
Is when I'm eating at the table, again, that elderly version, where I knock over the glass. I remember saying to Stanley that maybe I could do something a little different to distract my character that causes me to look over to the bed and see that old man version of me, even older, since in the earlier shot, it looks like I've heard something in the bathroom that makes me get up to look. I suggested knocking over the wine glass. It was Stanley, though, who turned it into art in the next shot where it shattered on the floor. It's such a powerful image, and I'm not sure what it means, but it resonates as a loss and aging. That makeup of the bald guy in the bed took 12 hours, and luckily we shot the scene in one day. When we shot the Stargate sequence, I had no idea what it would look like. I was sitting there in a close-up wearing my spacesuit. That was me moving, not the camera. I had to tense my face to the point where I was shaking, and since it was such an extreme close-up, it translates as a lot of movement. And he had lights flashing on my helmet, but that's my eye, by the way. In an extreme close-up.
So when it came to the production of the Stargate sequence, the most successful, I would say, was Doug Trumbull's slit scan material. Doug Trumbull,
Oh yes, this has been done so many times as a meme,
and his street photography.
so many
He
ways.
has developed a technique he called slit scan. And this was keeping the
And
camera
this is
shutter
recreated,
open
by the
while
way.
moving the art behind a slit and moving the camera towards the art. Trumbull invented an ingenious machine to do this automatically. This created a really dramatic perspective, and it was the key to Kubrick's Stargate sequence.
Then you had the aerial photography of Scotland.
So it's like a kaleidoscope.
A helicopter over Scotland and filmed some of that
Interesting.
material, and then another team filmed over Monument Valley. And then that material was run through various processes to invert all the colors and create this kaleidoscopic effect of flying over an alien world. In the early conceptions and storyboards, you saw the space pod and you saw it going through the Stargate. And
It's
that
like
had
No
the
Man's
effect of
Sky, but
distancing
done much
the
better.
audience from the experience that the astronaut was having through multiple dimensions. But then that was refined to the point where the audience was along for the ride, and the audience was in effect looking through Bowman's eyes as subjective observers rather than outside looking in. The return of Bowman in one way or another was baked in before they even conceived of what the destination of the spacecraft was supposed to be, Saturn or Jupiter or what. Kubrick showed up to a meeting with Clark with Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is this extraordinary look at the commonalities between human mythology.
Joseph Campbell.
And Campbell boiled it down to the mythical hero goes on a journey away from his people, enters a magical realm, and brings back knowledge important to his people. And this is common to almost every myth from any culture on Earth. So then later on,
Joseph Campbell is so important. I think today's directors and producers, they forget this person.
And they were trying to figure out how to end it, and Kubrick was leaning on Clark, give me something. And Clark came up with several ideas, none of which went anywhere. And then finally he wrote, Bowman is transformed into a floating fetus that orbits Earth. And Kubrick loved it. That served to bring the hero back with knowledge. And that's the mythical structure, the return of the mythic hero who goes off into the universe and comes back. In various versions, iterations of the script, the Star Child was going to be seen detonating those orbiting nuclear weapons. But Kubrick thought that was too close to Strangelove, it was too literal, and no need. I think he was right. I believe that in the novel it's still there. In which case, the Star Child is removing the tool.
Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead. Let me see. I think this is a recreation here.
You can't get a better moment than that. That was the only time in the movie where my character shows any emotion, and is not so much emotion as holding it in. I don't say anything as Hal is begging me to stop. You can hear my breathing in the space helmet. It's
That's
only when
neat.
he asks if I want to hear the song that he learned that I say, oh yeah, sing it to me. And so
Sing it to me, Hal. Look at that. That is really good.
the first artificial speech
This is all
ever spoken
CGI.
by a computer in 1961. And I think at this point, my character does think of Hal as almost another crew member.
The breakdown that Hal has in the film makes you question how we teach artificial intelligence, how much we want it to become.
Our astrophysicists are sure different.
What's interesting is that AI always felt like it was something that was hard to get right. And all of a sudden, ChatGPT comes out with a large language model, right, an LLM, that is effectively Hal. That shows you where things are heading. I mean, we are definitely getting towards artificial general intelligence pretty quickly. I mean, the prediction is this decade. I think Kubrick's point there is that we don't really understand the technology that we're building. We know how to build mechanical light for LLMs, but we're not exactly sure how it works.
And
I think it's really explored in this
oh, this is CGI as well.
Kubrick is such an important voice in 2001 because he did bring that idea of futurism.
I believe that when 2001 came out, it wasn't just a challenge, it was almost an opening to all these future filmmakers to rethink how they could tell the stories that were percolating in their souls and their minds with this new design language. And you have the testimony of many directors, whether it's Spielberg or Lucas, saying how when they saw that movie, they felt inspired to go do their own version of that.
2001 was so far above everything else.
I really enjoyed THX 1138. That was like his George Lucas's best movie.
Star Wars movies where we were spending money on technology to push the envelope further than what Kubrick had done. But there's a huge gap between 2001 and everything else until we started to develop more interesting.
With Steven Spielberg, I thought it was AI.
Effects like Star Wars. That was the first time since 2001 that a fusion of talent and money went into making something better than what you'd seen before. No other film that I can think of has anything like the ambition of 2001. 2001 traces the human species from pre-human to post-human and manages to convey that in a way
Oh my God.
it's a
There's more of this.
meditation as much as it is some entertainment.
It represents the constant question, who are we and why are we here? Humanity's constantly going to keep asking questions. We're going to push ourselves further. We're going to get to that goalpost and we're going to push it further. And so that question never stops. And that's that cycle of just what it means to be human.
It wasn't just the 2001.
I'm going to watch the 3-minute video after this. I'll react to that one. And then from there, we'll see what OTOY does.
Transcendental and how deeply powerful it is when you have to go outside the film to almost understand its place in your mind and your soul. It's incredible. And I think that's why 2001 needs to be part of the modern mythology of storytelling.
I knew 2001 was
I didn't even know this actor was alive. I thought he died, but both the actors are still alive. Gary Lockwood as well.
We'd still be talking about it over 50 years later. To me, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey defined the modern science fiction film.
Fantastic. So yeah, we'll look at the. If you give me a moment, we'll get to the last video. I'll give you my thoughts, of course. I will give you my thoughts on this. Oh, no. Not ready yet.
Learn Spanish with Real Spanish TV.
I've watched Spanish TV. I've watched it for years, 20 years ago. Okay, here we go. Let's see what this is. This is the actual... It's not going to come out very sharp, but it is on OTOY's YouTube channel if you want to see it uninterrupted. Holy shit. What is that? Oh my god. This is not the movie. This is OTOY recreating everything. The colors are right. The texture is right. It's like you're back in 1969. There's Hal. And there's the monolith. I mean, you can only, I mean, it's a simple rectangle, right? It's a simple domino. But I like this room. This is the final room. All recreated. There is nothing real in what you're seeing right now. Just all archived. I don't know if they'll archive 2010, but might as well try it. And I do think there's one more, but it has nothing to do with OTOY. But we'll look at that while I give my final thoughts on what we just saw. Odysseys. Oh my God. That's where he's out in space. Can't breathe. They're the two Tatooine sons, the twin sons of Tatooine there. I mean, between the Roddenberry archive and the rest of OTOY, they're doing great. Let me see if I can find. There was somebody else who worked on it. I've seen that one already, but I'll give you my final thoughts while I look for it. I have a little bit to say on it. Recreating 2001, Space Odyssey. If I can find it, maybe not. We have the OTOY version. There was another one that I saw before. Visual Effects Pioneer. I know I saw something similar. Well, I don't think it's in here. All right. I'll just we'll just look at the trailer. All right. I'll give you my final thoughts on the whole thing. Yeah, it looks good. I mean, what they're trying to do is just recreate a lot of the sets that you see, a lot of the miniatures, the Jupiter ship inside. So we're looking at the real footage. I didn't think this actor was still alive. So I didn't even know there was a fucking keyboard, a piano inside the space station. And they showed us everything, how everything worked, all the behind the scenes stuff. And 2001 Space Odyssey. Yeah, I thought it was impressive. They're recreating Star Trek and they're recreating 2001. So between all the bad news that we've been having with Keanu Reeves or whatever they're doing with Superman, it's nice to look at some positive feedback and positive energy. And this was like the update was like 3 weeks ago. So Odyssey, Star Trek. What else can we see? 2010, maybe the inside of the Space Shuttle Enterprise, the real Enterprise, the space shuttle from the 90s. There's so many possibilities. They got to recreate. I don't think we saw the model for the space station, just the inside of the station, I think, or the inside of Jupiter rather. We haven't seen anything more. There's the inside of the station where the man goes to talk to his daughter. And then he says he's on a non-disclosed assignment, but we don't see the inside of that. So slowly but surely, I still want to see Cisco's offices in the Deep Space Nine, not just the Promenade, not just Quark's bar, but the Cisco's office, because everybody goes to Cisco's office. So yeah, they just showed us all the special effects. So what am I gonna do? It's 1:00. I think in a few hours I might be able to do the Nintendo Direct. I might not. I'm kind of like in front of a window, so I'm worried about the lighting and it being too bright. If it's too bright, I'm probably just going to do it in another room, but I'll do my best to react. Hopefully don't get like 10 farming games. I'm not going to tolerate that. And give a like if you like this. If not, well, sucks to be you. I guess we'll do the Nintendo Direct. I guess you can like that one then. All right? All right.